Good morning. Please stand and join us in singing our spirit music, number 346, Come Sing a Song with Me. Opening words.
Our opening words are from Audre Lorde, a queer and intersectional feminist theorist and activist. It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. And with these words, light chalice.
It's electric. Oh. Yeah. Awesome. Cool stuff.
Neat technology, great. Okay, good morning. And welcome to the Universalist Unitarian Church of Farmington. Get this mic adjusted. My name's Kevin Smith, and I'm a member here of your executive board and serving as your vice president of finance right now. Our minister, Reverend Leonetta Belasi, is out of the pulpit this morning, and our guest speaker, as you've just met, is Dee Church. I'll introduce Dee a little bit later on before he makes his presentation. So I'd like to extend a special welcome to any first-time visitors that we have here today. Please join us for coffee, bagels, and conversation after the service downstairs. A member of the membership committee will be available to answer any questions you have. And at this time, if there is anyone here that's the first-time visitor and is brave enough, I ask you to please stand up and introduce yourselves. Tell us, how you found us, where you're from, and we'd like to get to know you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Daisy McDougall. I'm a friend of Dee's, and I'm here to about their
Great, welcome. Anyone else? Okay. So as most of you know, during the service we have a supervised nursery for babies and toddlers and RE classes for the children and youth. If you need to leave the service for any reason, there's 2 other locations where we broadcast the service, and an usher can help you connect with those 2 locations. And as always, let's all remember we're a welcoming congregation. We welcome all humans regardless of race, sexual orientation, belief system, and age, even the small children that may be fidgety and making noises. These folks are our future, and we welcome them while they're here in the meeting house. So I have a couple of announcements. One is, I think most folks know, we have a construction project that's about to begin paving the parking lot. And it's going to disrupt our church schedule for a bit over the next few months. It's been pretty well advertised and documented. There's information in the order of service. I know the Magnet had some detail. But one of the things I'd like to emphasize in my VP of Finance job is pledge collections. If you want to continue those over the next couple of months when the services may be disrupted, you can mail in your pledges. And to help you with that, there's envelopes. These, I think I have one. These small envelopes are available both back at the visitors table here and in the church office. You want to grab a few of those to make that job easy. I thank you for that. And I think there's a couple other announcements. Barb?
I'm Barb Eglinton, the current president of the executive board. So next week we have no service, but then we do have a service here on the 8th. So we're taking a break next week for the 4th of July. It's July 1st. But the other thing is, as part of in preparation for the parking lot clearing, we are moving the playground from that low area, and that's where our detention pond's going to be. It's moving up the hill, and you may have noticed that there was a lot of generous helpers that helped us clear that area. But now we have a lot of free wood. So if you have a use for the wood that's stacked up in the wood pile, it's free for the taking. So if you have a way to come and get it, you're free to take it.
Marie Laurie, I'm on the Social Justice Committee. I have a couple of announcements. One is, as you see every week on the slides, when we collect things for Alternatives for Girls, the toiletries, please do keep collecting those over the summer and either hang on to them or let me know and I can get them from you somehow over the summer, as well as books for the Little Free Libraries. In addition, the Order of Service again has today a Caring Sunday envelope in it. If you donated last week, we thank you very much. And if you were not here last week and would like to donate this week, good news, you have another chance. The money we're collecting is for a playground at Freedom House. Many of you have probably seen the articles this week about Mamba and Nadia, who lived in Freedom House. Nadia was actually their longest-term resident. It took a long time to get their paperwork in order and to get Mamba here. They're opening a restaurant right at the end of the queue line. It's a perfect spot. It's going to be a great restaurant. They're good people. Giving back to the community, they came through Freedom House. We are trying to build a playground for all of the children who are there now. They have twin 5-year-olds who were there a long time. There's nowhere for them to play safely at this point. So if you can, please donate. We'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Paul Massan. I'm part of the playground relocation team. Good morning. I'm Paul Massan. I'm part of the playground relocation team. I want to thank all the volunteers that have helped so far in the clearing and removing of the chain link fence around the current playground. We were able to negotiate a reduced price with our contractor by doing some of this work. The teams removed about 80 or 90% of the chain link fence so far. There's still another 10% to do. So anyone that would like to come down after church today and help remove the last 30 or 40 feet of chain link, that would be greatly appreciated. So thanks a lot. The contractor is also going to be leveling the playground area, so that will be a nice level surface for the kids to play on when we're all done. So thank you very much.
Okay, let me remind you, you can check your order of service for further announcements. And I ask you, if you haven't done so already, to please take a moment and silence your cell phones. And also, before we proceed, I'd like to take a moment to welcome our guest musician today. Patricia Tate is here to help us both with her piano and harp skills. So, Patricia, welcome and thank you. With that, our next hymn is number 134, Our World is One World. Please stand as you're able. Please join me in reading the Litany of Gathering in your order of service. This is our sacred time and space. We gather in community to renew our spirits, to explore the mystery, and to share our joys and sorrows. With you I find strength. Together we become bound by love and respect. With me you can share your deepest self. Together we learn to understand and to forgive. We share triumphs and we inspire. We share failures and we share our human nature. We share joy and it multiplies. We share sorrow and it begins to lessen. So please come forward at this time to share whatever joys and sorrows of a personal nature you want to share with the congregation.
Hi, I'm Barb Iovan. I have two joys, actually. I think it was last week. My grandchildren had their birthday celebration with the oldest turning 9. I can't believe it. And the triplets turned 7. It's just so amazing how time flies. More when they're grandchildren somehow than when they're your own. I have a huge joy to share. I just got back last night from summer camp for adults. Some of you might recognize the name SOG for All. This is an offshoot of that because it's expanded so much. And in this camp, we, oh my gosh, there was incredible music every day and every night and storytelling. We had a moth. We all chose a class that we'd have for 5 days. And I chose an acrylic flow painting class and made many pictures like this that I just loved. It was really fun and met so many great people. And my award at the end, everybody got a paper plate award, and mine was for, because I was a rookie, a new person, Moth Rookie of the Year Award for my moth story. So they're much like people here there, and it was just a great time. Thanks.
Anyone else? In the case, let me close by actually lighting 2 candles. One I will light to recognize the many families that are still caught up in our immigration mess down on the border, including over 1,800 children that are still separated from their families. And lastly, let me light a candle for all the unspoken joys and sorrows among us. Now, I ask you to please join me in reading together our words of offering. The gifts we offer today are given with positive intent toward the work of justice and compassion accompanied by our community. beautiful. Right, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for today. It's Dee Church. A lot of you probably recognize Dee. Dee grew up here in our UUCF congregation, and he recently graduated from Michigan State University with a major in psychology and a minor in LGBTQ plus studies. Dee plans to travel to Amsterdam this summer for a study abroad program focusing on sexual orientation and gender identity politics. This fall, Dee will begin studying for a master's degree in social work at the University of Michigan. So at least you're moving up the ladder the right way, university way. So please help me welcome Dee Church.
That's my background. It is a chicken. Where'd the slide go? Hold up. Apparently. Well, that's better. Okay. So hello. My name is Dee Church. My pronouns are they, them, their, and I'm here to talk to you about Pride Month, LGBTQ plus identities, and the different language one might use to describe different facets of ourselves, or the layers that make us a romantic, sexual, and even gendered person. Now, even some of us don't even identify with one or all of those layers. So, start things off. Happy Pride Month, everyone. So the first Pride March, I should say, happened June 28th, 1970. It marked the first anniversary of the Stonewall riots in Greenwich Village. 49 years ago, being LGBTQ was essentially illegal, and police raids were common in LGBTQ spaces. But one night, a group of queer and trans patrons at the Stonewall Inn, headed by Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, two trans people of color who often go unrecognized, fought back against police in a raid that lasted 2 nights. And this is really where Pride comes from. It's a protest as well as a celebration. It's a moment where people in the LGBTQ plus community, whether they're out or not, can feel pride in themselves despite constant oppression that still exists today. As it stands, 700,000 LGBTQ plus Americans have been subjected to what is known as conversion therapy or ex-gay therapy, many of whom were subjected to it as adolescents. Conversion therapy reflects the sick belief that you can change someone's sexual orientation and gender identity using shock treatments, aversive techniques to make the person nauseous, and talk therapy. Estimates say that 20,000 LGBTQ plus youth will be subjected to conversion therapy by a licensed healthcare professional before their 18th birthday. An additional 75,000 youth will be subjected to it by a religious or spiritual advisor before reaching 18. Even after 18, people who are LGBTQ plus are likely to face discrimination in housing, employment, and public accommodation in most of the United States, and that's including Michigan. Now, we as Universalist Unitarians seek and advocate for the justice and inclusivity of the most marginalized among us. We must strive to make our congregation and the world in which we live in a more inclusive and open space where people feel comfortable being their authentic selves. That often means educating ourselves on some of the ways in which we might contribute to oppressive or exclusive practices. One example of this is as our language and culture changes, as our culture changes, language changes as well. If you were a college student in the 60s, you might have seen a gay student group on campus. Then maybe later a gay and lesbian student group. And then an LGB student group that includes those who are bisexual. And then an LGBT student group that includes those who are transgender. Then somewhere along the way, you might have seen an LGBTQIP2SAA+. So we're on to numbers now. And my sermon isn't going to focus on breaking down every letter of the LGBTQ plus initialism, but what I hope you gather from it is, or what I hope to do is give you the tools in which to sort of understand these identities and in ways we can make our congregation more inclusive. The first thing I want to talk about is sex. Probably not what you're thinking, although this is a Universalist Unitarian church, so I wouldn't be surprised. But no, I'm talking about how the ways our bodies are made. And this typically comes in 4 categories. External genitalia, chromosomes, hormones, testes, and ovaries. Typically we think of sex as ranging from female and male. But there are some people who don't fit into this binary mold that we have in terms of biological sex. Those people are called intersex. This means someone could have XX chromosomes, but have external genitalia that might resemble what we might call a penis. They could have XO chromosomes, XXY chromosomes, XXX chromosomes, and any combination. So yeah, there's so many ways that human beings can be, and those who are intersex make up around 2% of the population. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's not that much, but sort of think about it like this. 2%, the same, or those who are intersex are the same percentage as redheads. At one point in time, hermaphrodite might have been the language to use when describing someone who is intersex, but this term has been actively rejected by the intersex community because it often medicalizes and dehumanizes the person. And language is really important when we're talking about identity and terms, because although words might mean the same thing, like intersex and hermaphrodite, pointing to sort of similar characteristics, what language does, how it's used, how it's deployed is important, and how it makes the people who are subject to that language feel. So with the intersex community actively rejecting hermaphrodite, intersex would be the term to use. Now, the next term is gender identity. And we typically see gender identity from ranging from being a woman to being a man. And notice the language change between these 2 categories. Female, male, and intersex are often to describe biological characteristics, but not always. There are some people who are transgender who might identify as F to M or female to male. But gender is typically what we would use in a social setting. Gender is a social construct, and so you don't refer to someone as females, you refer to them as women. And then in between these 2, there can be someone who is bigender, who experiences an internalized sense of self in regard to gender that is both man and woman. There are also those, like myself, who identify outside the binary. Those people are called non-binary. There are also those who are agender, A being without and gender being gender. And then you also have people who are gender fluid. This means people whose gender identity might change on a month-to-month, week-to-week, or moment-to-moment basis. So next is gender expression. Now, this is how we present ourselves to the world with our clothing, makeup, language, etc. And we typically think about, and just sort of as a side note, gender identity doesn't necessarily determine gender expression. As we all know, there's more than one way to be a woman or be a man. Women and men can both wear suits and dresses and still be women and men and stay with their how they are, how they identify. And expression typically ranges from femme to masc, or feminine presenting and masculine presenting. But this is kind of confusing, seeing how these terms can mean different things to different people and have really meant different things historically. For instance, raise your hand if you could tell me who this is. It might surprise some of you to know that this is actually a baby picture of our 32nd president of the United States, FDR. Whoa. So, but this was, wearing dresses was sort of a normal practice for children FDR's age at the time. It's important to say that it's a normal practice and not fueled by some satanic left-wing gay agenda. And FDR probably wore similar garments up until the age of 6, and of what was deemed as gender neutral. Going further back, when we look at 17th century French men's fashion, you can look at those heels. So, what's important to gather from this is that gender and gender expression are all about context. And that context might be different for each person in this congregation of what we see as feminine or masculine. The next category I want to talk about is sexual orientation. So sexual orientation typically ranges from those who are attracted to the same gender and those who are attracted to different genders. But even having this on a spectrum is really confusing because it doesn't really do justice to people who experience a wide variety of things. There are people who disclose information they might not feel comfortable disclosing at that time. So they, them, there would be the safest bet when interacting with someone who you might not know their pronouns. The second recommendation would be to have name tags. So we all have name tags, and just sort of being able to leave a space where someone can write their pronouns. This sort of leads to easy communication for how to refer to someone in an interaction. And then the third recommendation I have is to normalize stating your pronouns. At the beginning of this, I said, hello, my name is Dee Church. I use they, them, their pronouns. Or, and I would use this in sort of when introducing yourself, in group meetings, just when talking to someone, sort of like Dave McBusiness here. But, and then the fourth recommendation is to sort of eliminate any sort of gendered greetings, like hello, ladies and gentlemen. And I would replace this with hello, beloved community, or hello, everyone. At the beginning of this, I said hello, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. So understand that I kind of flew by a lot of information, and you might have some questions. So I want to sort of open that up to people if you have any questions to ask, and that I can try and answer, but understand that a lot of the information I presented comes from my own lens of being in the LGBTQ community and working with those in the community as well. So the way I might describe something might be different from how someone else describes something. But go ahead. Yeah.
Can you go back to the slide that has all the letters and one number and define and identify those?
Yeah. Okay. There we go. So, like, define all of them, or just the one that's 2S? All of them. Okay. So L, lesbian, or I'm just going to go off. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, pansexual, two-spirit. Those are people in the Native American culture. The closest thing we would have in language would be transgender, but that sort of removes it from its historical and cultural context. Also, you might hear in some, if you read historical texts, they are referred to as burdaki, but this is a slur since it is French for male prostitute. And then A being asexual, the other A being aromantic, plus is just being safe. So, any other questions? Yes.
It's not a question, but the they, them, there, I had an issue with it grammatically.
Yeah.
I'm talking about a single person, but I'm using a plural pronoun.
Mm-hmm.
And I was telling your mom that if you're saying non-binary, so if you're not just one thing, you're identifying along the spectrum, so they being plural is kind of appropriate.
Well, so not necessarily. So, no, you're good, I know. I don't want people to be like, wow, I don't want to like ask a question. But, so, I am a singular person. Non-binary sort of reflects of people who exist outside binary thinking, I guess, because we typically think of just like man, woman, that's a binary. Bigender sort of is the idea of just like, well, there are two. And even language like, oh, well, they're dressed kind of androgynously has andro, meaning men, and then gene, meaning woman. So that's also sort of perpetuating this binary. Non-binary is just like or my own identity is I don't necessarily, my internalized sense of self doesn't really reflect a binary mode of thinking. And I know so for editors, let's say, the AP style book, which a lot of editors use, has sort of accepted singular they as gender-neutral pronouns. So I don't know if that answered your question, if I just rambled off. But
they is kind of singular, but them
Yeah.
and their, when you use those pronouns, they really denote a plural. But that, I mean, it's just a grammar thing.
Yeah, no. And I mean, as our culture changes, I think that language really changes for the need of the people using it. And so singular, they, them, their, has sort of been like adapted as the gender-neutral pronoun. And even when we look back at like Shakespeare or Jane Austen, there are instances of using a singular gender-neutral they, them, their. So, yeah. Anyone else? Kyle.
I'm actually interested in jumping on that a little bit more, if that's okay.
Sure. No, you're good.
Just that I've noticed that a lot in my own experience that when we are referring to people where we don't know their gender, that we inherently use they, them, their. So let's say somebody lost their phone. That really sucks for them. I hope they find it. They are probably missing it. Even though it's an individual, it's a singular phone. One phone can't belong to multiple people unless
Your data plan's like that? I don't know.
For the most part, if we are uncertain, we inherently use they, them, their if we don't know if it's male or female that we're referring to outside of the sermon that you just gave. So hopefully that helps shed a little bit more light on that situation.
Yeah.
Same topic. It's a great. I've never heard a description like that. It was great. And to your presentation was just terrific.
Thank you.
What's interesting though is that since I go both directions to the extreme, I find they uncomfortable
100%.
because I try and work so hard to be me,
Yeah.
and he doesn't have to work at it. But the point is, for me, it's like not acknowledging the she that I am.
100%. Yeah. And so, sorry.
I don't know how anybody can understand it because you live it, you can't even understand it. So,
Yeah. And so for, I know I have friends who will go by different pronouns at different times, and they might signal that with their gender expression, or go by multiple pronouns. Like one of my friends will go by she, her, hers, and they, them, their. There are people who are just like, oh, they'll like signal just like, oh, it's he, him, his today, and then another day it might be, oh, it's she, her, hers, and you just make the switch. And people might signal that with expression, or just being like, hey, just a heads up, this. Yeah. Identity and language isn't this sort of fixed concept that we all kind of think it is. It's rather fluid in a lot of ways. Does that answer your question?
yeah, and I actually believe that since we're 2%, that when it does, and it does hurt to be called the wrong pronoun. I take responsibility when it comes out wrong. You know, if somebody says wrong, then I'm not doing something quite right. And I also respect
Yeah.
the fact that we're living in a society, we are 2%, and I think we need to suck it up sometimes, even though it hurts. Because we need to respect the fact that there's 98% of the world that doesn't, it's hard for us to grasp the alone now. Sorry, keep my rest of you think like you're not here, but.
Yeah. Yeah, no. And I think that's sort of, I feel the usefulness of like they, them, there, and people who might not fit within our community using it, since it doesn't really denote any sort of gender. And opening it up of where people who are transgender, cisgender, who don't identify with either, with sort of normalizing the use of pronouns, of having like stating your pronouns or having pronouns on a name tag can be like really helpful in opening that up, and working towards like a future where like we don't have to suck it up. Because I know a lot of times when I'm getting a haircut, where it's just like, oh, I like hair, like, you know, you really have like nice hair for a man, and it's just like, but sort of doing like the hard, slow, but necessary work in sort of changing and making a future where we don't have to. Yeah.
I agree. I think when you hear something more often, you begin to change, and I totally support.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
The term cis is being used. Could you explain that?
Yes. So, difference between someone who is cisgender and someone who is transgender. So, cisgender sort of reflects when someone is born into this world, they are assigned a gender. It is either like boy, girl, or now there are people who are sort of doing gender-neutral parenting. But so cisgender is the gender you identify with reflects the gender you were assigned at birth. Those who are transgender is your gender is different from what you were assigned at birth. And there's a lot of, I suppose, debate within the community of what really transgender means. Trans is like a biological prefix. Cis is same side, trans, opposite side. But that in itself reflects a binary. So people who are non-binary might not feel that, or might feel that the term transgender doesn't really represent or reflect them. But there are other people who are just like, well, trans could be just meaning from going from one place to another. So then there are non-binary people who do identify as transgender. So there's a lot of variability. But, yeah. Yes?
Don't you think in everyday life that everyone has the range of where they, in a sense, have a role one way or the other in different situations too? I mean, both with sexuality and with female, that nobody, I'm not sure that anybody's here that there's fluidity.
Oh yeah, no, like, so going all the way back to stuff like this, of being either one side or the other or in the middle, these can range from all across the spectrum, from outside the spectrum, and even change moment to moment, day to day basis. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just saying, I think that to me is it's better, not a better way, but it's there can be a million little points along here.
Oh yeah.
Here, everybody wants to define that little point where they're at, but I'm not sure that it's that specific.
No, 100%. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, these kind of don't do like the term and just like the identities justice in the ways we think about them. But, yeah.
You had a slide there with the pride flag, but it was a variation of the pride flag. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Going all the way back again. Where did I have that? There we go. So we have the normal pride flag with the trans pride flag there, and then the black and brown recognizes people of color because they are often erased. Their experiences are often erased and not talked about in LGBTQ plus circles. So the white, pink, and blue are trans. The brown and black represent giving representation to people of color in the LGBTQ community. And this is like the newest proposed flag. And there are like variations of each flag. There's like a asexual flag, bisexual flag, demisexual flag, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yes?
When I look at my driver's license, it says sex M.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, do you envision that this is going to change
Yeah, 100%, because
Is that what you're proposing? Are you a proponent of that idea that we should have, all these other letters for our gender acceptance?
yeah, because I don't think that listing your biological sex really, in terms of identifying a person, doesn't really do that justice. I know people in, I think, California, Washington, and I think recently Maine have adopted a sort of non-binary like sort of sex thing, and an intersex activist group is, I think, suing the United States because they're just like, well, if I put either male or female, that's technically lying because that's not my reality. Did that answer your question? Or, but I do.
I'm asking you if you think that this is what the government should be doing.
Yeah, I think there should be.
When you're born, when you're born, it's
I think, yeah, like
on
in.
your birth certificate, should it say male or female or not?
Yeah, so in terms of like birth certificate, it might be useful for just medical purposes, but that in itself is kind of limiting. Because you want to make sure that later on you are respecting the gender identity of the kid, because you might not know how they might identify later on. Because more and more people, as we sort of have this more expansive idea of what gender is, more and more people might identify as trans and different things. In terms of just like medical forms of what that should have, as well as on license, that can be very limiting. I know Michigan State, the place I just graduated from, they have, in their healthcare system, they have this system called Atlanta or something, where it sort of decides like, oh, what insurances are needed and whatnot. And so if your biological sex is listed on a medical form, and it's just like, well, okay, because a lot of systems like to put things into boxes of where it'll be like, okay, so it says your sex is male, then why do you need insurance for a breast exam? And so if there can be more variability in how we sort of change our medical forms and change our certificates and whatnot, I think that can, in the end, be better for inclusive practices for those who are LGBTQ+. I don't know if that answers it all the way, or...
You just said LGBTQ+, just said the one Q. Which Q is that?
Q is queer. So,
That's where we used to use, and I thought it was a bad word.
yeah, so that's sort of been reclaimed in sort of the, I guess, younger members. But Q can either mean queer or questioning. I myself identify as queer. Queer as a term sort of came out of this post-structuralist theory of thought that is where it's used as a noun, verb, and adjective. And it sort of goes without definition, and it's mostly talked about in queer theory. And there are like a few good resources for this. There's a website called What the Fuck is Queer Theory, and as well as a book, Queer Theory and Introduction, in the 90s that sort of details the historic and cultural path of where like queer as a term has been used. There's also, what is it? Queer, a graphic history. That's sort of this like graphic novel that details like, you know, queer used to mean something as just like, oh, well, that's sort of queer, is different. And then it evolved from that to be a slur for people in the LGBTQ community. And then sometime in like 80s, 90s, it got reclaimed as an identifier because, as I talked about earlier, identity can be often limiting. Think of identity less as jars and more so like outlines. A lot of who you are might spill very well into like one outline, but sort of spill into another one. It doesn't necessarily invalidate the identity that you identify with, but it just says that there's more to it than that. And so queer as a term sort of is this expansive, undefinable thing that is just sort of an umbrella term that sort of goes without definition, I guess. I sort of joke that the first rule of queer theory is don't define queer theory. So, but, yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
What do you think about labeling?
Yeah.
Of the psychology school I went to, that was like, let's not try to label people.
Mm-hmm.
And just live.
Yeah.
With all of us. I mean, I know there's a reason to do some of it, but I just wonder how you feel.
Yeah, because a lot of the times the question will come up, which is like, well, why can't we all just be people? A lot of it comes from the fact that people in the LGBTQ plus community come from a very like marginalized space, and so these identities is really how we find others like us. Of just being like, oh, because I know when I talk to someone in the LGBTQ community, and I might define demisexual or asexual, like a light bulb goes off of just like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. That's me. And so it's identity is just a way to build community and recognize that there are others like us and that we are normal. Oh, yeah.
I can't suppress asking this.
Yeah.
Why is it so essential that there's that M and that F on your driver's license and your birth certificate?
I have no idea.
Represent you totally as an individual. Why can't it simply represent some convenient packaging or binary bin that you're placing for medical reasons or whatever? It's not an identity of a whole person. It's just a characteristic. What's the problem with putting M on the birth certificate?
Yeah, so people so intersex activists, we might say, gender assigned at birth. But they also say that sex is also sort of assigned at birth because, as we know, there are a bunch of different ways that genitals can be, as well as our chromosomes, hormones, etc., where an M might not tell the whole story. I think, and a lot of people who discover in their 40s or 50s that they are some form of intersex. They might have external genitalia that might represent what is male, but they're just like, oh, but my chromosomes are XX or something like that. That's
If I can, I'm going to respond if I
Yeah.
can.
Of course.
Okay, so the person is more than what's represented there, but nothing about the representation limits the utility of that.
How do you mean?
If somebody discovers in their 40s, they've had 40 years of life in which it might be useful socially, medically, and for other reasons to have that designation as a bin that they are put in. Nothing that I know, it doesn't seem to me that in any way needs to limit the identity of that person. It's
Yeah.
just a convenience. It's just
Yeah, and it's really useful for some people, and I'm not saying remove M or remove F in total, but it's just sort of expanding that of adding an I or something, because it can be very useful for a lot of people, but just sort of being able to expand the way we think about biological sex and medical purposes for that can be really useful. And so I'm not advocating for removing M or F, but just ways of saying that there's more to it, I suppose, if that answers your question. Yeah, go ahead.
I think a larger portion of the problem with assigning M and F to an individual isn't that it's not useful in the medical community or that you might not identify with it later, but it is the basis of a lot of assumptions that people make about you. So if
Yes and no.
Is it more transsexual to chase something biological?
Yeah, so historically, I think like 70s and 80s was sort of transsexual was the term to define someone who like changed sex, but then transgender was more so the term because it then became like, well, whether or not someone medically transitions or not is like really none of anyone's business. And so some people might identify as transsexual, like I said earlier, F to M, or like female to male. And that's like more so a personal thing. I think one, where is it? Yeah. One addition would be like another T. So it would be transgender, transsexual, to sort of say like there are some people who are just like, yes, I have like gone through like the hormone replacement therapy and gender affirming surgery, and there are other people who are transgender who are just like, well, that's kind of like none of anyone's business. And or there's some who like who don't medically transition, who still identify as transgender, like myself. But yeah, does that answer your question, or does that kind of make things more complicated?
So it's more generic as far as your identity as opposed to physical traits.
Yeah. Any other questions? What's up? Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, if anyone has like, if someone's just like, I don't want to like ask this question because, then you can come talk to me at Adams Hall. So awesome. So closing words is from my favorite show, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, on Hulu. That's not a plug, I swear. But when one of this character, Raymond Holt, one of his coworkers came out, he said, every time someone steps up and says who they are, they're making the world a better and more interesting place. And so I thank you for having me come speak to you and asking really good and difficult questions, and so that we can have this dialogue and conversation so we can build a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee. Okay, our closing hymn will be hymn number 170, We Are a Gentle, Loving People. Please rise as you're able.
We
Okay, so this concludes our service. Please stay and enjoy the postlude, and then join us downstairs for coffee and conversation.